Okay, good morning. I'm Esther Manheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the March 7th, 2024 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You may listen to the meeting via phone at 855-925-2801, meeting code 1724. We will not take public comments during the meeting, as we do not during all work sessions. And so I'm going to ask the council and staff who are here to please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
And we will not be joined by Councilwoman Sandra Kilgore or Maggie Ullman, but we will be joined by Shanika Smith a little bit later. We also have some city staff with us here today. City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning.
City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
Okay, and before I turn it over to the City Manager, I want to say congratulations to Kim Roney and Sage Turner for your primary results. Well deserved. And it's good to know that you didn't get voted out of office for voting for the Merriman Avenue Road Diet. I was just in an MPO meeting, so I had a little flashback. All right, I'm turning it over to Deborah Campbell.
Thank you. And again, good morning. As you all know, these meetings are designed for us to take a little deeper dive in terms of the agenda for your upcoming council meeting, which is scheduled for March the 12th. It's an in-person meeting starting at 5 o'clock in City Hall. We also have a number of other items that we want to update you on, review your committee items that are going to various committees. We will also update you on an item that you deferred at your last council meeting. It was on a consent item agenda, I believe, regarding the Boosting the Block project for facilitator. And we'll have that under the section under other issues and updates. And as you all know, we rotate in terms of the assistant city managers that handle these reviews. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Wood, who will be managing the agenda from here. Rachel.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning, Mayor and Council. So we'll start with a quick review of the March 12th City Council business meeting agenda. We do have two proclamations for March 12th. One will be recognizing MAHEC's 50th anniversary month. CEO Dr. William Hathaway will be present to receive that proclamation. The second proclamation is recognizing March as Red Cross Month, and Jerry Goldberg and Megan Robinson, both of whom are Red Cross board members, will be present to receive that proclamation. As is our typical process, I'm going to go through the consent agenda by exception. If I skip over any items that you have questions about, please feel free to either raise your hand or speak up, and we can certainly cover any items that I skip over. As Deborah mentioned, item B is going to be covered in greater detail in the other issues section, and so I'm not going to cover that item at this time. Moving on to item E. Item E is an item that's relatively routine in nature, but because I'm a little bit of a performance management and strategic planning nerd, I'm going to highlight this one. This is a contract with Invisio for work planning and data visualization software. The software will be implemented throughout the remainder of the calendar year with the hope of us using this software for our organizational work plan and council committee work plan starting with fiscal year 2025. So throughout the calendar year, new dashboards and data visualization will be made available, but this is really exciting for us to be able to better visualize and better report the progress that we're making on projects that are aligned with your strategic priorities. Next, I'll move to item F. Item F is an interlocal agreement with Asheville City Schools for 5 school resource officers for the upcoming 2024-2025 school year. Asheville City Schools does pay the salary and benefits of those 5 officers. Moving down to items H and I. H and I are statutorily required items. The IRS requires that any bonds issued by the Housing Authority have a financing plan approved by the City Council. And while that financing plan does have to be approved by the City Council, the city has no financial obligation associated with the bonds or any obligation associated with debt taken on by the Housing Authority. But just to highlight the 2 projects where these bonds are being issued, item H is for $23.5 million in revenue bonds for Lakeshore Villas, which is a 120-unit affordable development off of Hendersonville Road that will be 60% AMI and below for a period of 30 years with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And then item I is a $12.8 million multifamily housing revenue bond project for Laurelwood Apartments. It's an existing development that will be adding 54 new units, bringing the total number of units at the site to 105. All 105 units in the development will be rent and income restricted at 40, 50, 60, and 80% of area median income with a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. And also wanted to remind council that you did approve in 2022 a $1.5 million housing trust fund loan for a period of 30 years associated with that project. Moving down to item J. Item J.
Rachel, I think it might be helpful to remind everyone why we have those giant looking loans on our consent agenda, which are not monies that the city of Asheville is borrowing.
Sure, and I can cover that again. So the IRS requires that any bonds issued by the Housing Authority have a financing plan approved by the City Council.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I don't know if it's worth noting it in the council meeting, but if we get any questions.
We can maybe work on the descriptions just to note that there's no obligation.
Yeah, I mean, these seem to go through without any issue. It's not quite intuitive, like why in the world it's on our consent agenda.
Okay, yeah, we can work on updating those descriptions. Moving down to item J, this is a 2-part item associated with the Asheville Buncombe Riverfront Commission. The first portion is removing the county commissioner seat, and this removal is being done at the county's request. Second portion is appointing Councilmember Ullman to the commission. And then last item on consent that I'll note is item K. This is a 2-part item associated with the $501,384,000 ARPA grant to Asheville Peak Academy. The first portion is authorizing the grant agreement, and then the second portion is authorizing the budget amendment associated with this grant. Moving down to presentations and reports, under the manager's report, we will have some employee recognitions associated with public safety personnel. And then I will turn it over to Ben Woody and the planning team to cover the conditional zoning item.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning, Mayor, members of council. I am going to share my screen as I talk. And you have one public hearing for this meeting, and it is a conditional zoning for the construction of a 105,000 square foot building that includes a 99-room hotel, restaurant, retail space, and below grade parking located off Hendersonville Road in Biltmore Village. And as you can see in the image, the 2 parcels highlighted in red are the subject property. Again, they're located on Hendersonville Road, south of its intersection with Sweeten Creek. And just to orient you a little more, the blue line at the top of the map is the Swannanoa River. So that's the location of the project. It comes to you for approval as a conditional zoning due to the size of the project. The property is located in the All Hotels Overlay District and the Biltmore Village Historic District Overlay. Which I'll cover recommendations in a second, but that requires a number of steps before it got to council for your consideration. Real quickly, I'll show, it's a little tough to see the site plan, but I think the takeaway is that the building itself largely occupies pretty much the extent of the land of the two parcels. So it really does have a footprint that covers both those parcels. The proposal is largely compliant with the UDO, but it is requesting several technical modifications that I'll briefly cover today. But of course, planning staff will cover those in more detail at the public hearing. But they're requesting a reduction of setbacks, an increase in the impervious surface limit, a reduction of some sidewalk widths on the smaller streets, a reduction in building impact and street tree landscaping requirements, and finally a reduction in the required loading spaces. And again, this is a pretty tight site for this building. And I did want to show you real quickly what the elevations look like. And of course, because this is in the Biltmore Village Historic Overlay District, it does require approval from the Historic Resources Commission, and that body did hear this request and issue a certificate of appropriateness on September 13th, 2023. And part of their task, of course, is to take a look at the elevations and the layout to make sure this proposal is in fact compatible with Biltmore Village. TRC reviewed this request in December. They recommended approval with conditions. Planning and Zoning had 2 meetings on this request. At their February meeting, they recommended approval unanimously. And finally, planning staff recommends approval. Any questions on that conditional zoning request?
Can you, wait, let me just make sure I understood. So they're in the hotel overlay. They're subject to the district's separate design review.
Yep.
And are they doing anything around our community benefits table and so on? Is this like where it's not being treated the same? It's coming to us as a conditional zoning because of square footage?
That's a good question that rather than me try to attempt to answer it, I'm going to ask Chris Collins. I saw he jumped on. If Chris, if you heard that question from Councilwoman Turner, are you able to respond? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. So this was a question that came up a good deal at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, and it falls in between the level 2 and the CZ concept with the hotels. And the first thing on that is frameworking that. Of course, the public benefit table is the level 2 review, or the by right review, is an incentive that requires the use of the public benefit table. So it's kind of a different tool than the conditional zoning. There are some aspects of the public benefit table that we are able to put into council conditions or rezoning conditions, and some that we're not. Some of those being like financial considerations really aren't appropriate for conditional zoning conditions. But we have gotten affirmative agreement from the developer that they are interested in contributing at the public benefit table level on this right now. It's just a lot of that is not things that we're able to put into rezoning conditions moving forward. And I know that that was something that Janice Ashley had a lot of input with the commission on, and I'm sure Brad could help as well as to why that is. But the size of the project, the reason it is not a level 2, the reason they're not able to take advantage of that incentive and not go through the rezoning process is twofold. Their base zoning district, well, their zoning district they're moving to, as well as their base zoning district, has elements that are not conducive to a multi-phased full block development like they're doing right now. So they had to modify some standards to go in with that urban of a development right there. And the hotel overlay also states that you have to meet the base zoning district. That is spelled out in there. So the need for those modifications and the fact that they're not meeting the provisions of the base district without factoring in the size of the hotel makes this one ineligible for that level 2 incentive. And then as the size moved up beyond 100,000 square feet, that also is a push factor for why this is coming through as a conditional zoning.
So I guess I think we've dealt with this one time before. I hope I'm remembering correctly, where we saw a hotel come, but like the intention around the overlay district and the community benefits table and stuff was to help give clarity to developers and say, you know, if you do X, Y, Z, you don't have to come to council. But then since they are doing something larger, whether I think the trigger is, you know, like you said, square footage, number of rooms, et cetera, they are able to just bypass that whole step. And when we were developing this, in my opinion, it was like, here's, you know, this is the criteria to do like a medium hotel. But when we get into the large, it's interesting to me that that criteria just goes away. Like maybe this is something that needs to be, you know, looked at in the future for this hotel overlay or something, because to me, these larger projects have to do that minimum that the middle-sized hotels would do, and then some more, you know, and I guess we'll talk more about it Tuesday, but are we going to see all that community benefits language and so on by Tuesday night? We'll be with the agenda Friday.
We have it now, don't we? Can't you distribute it?
Just the last P&Z or design reviews at the last, I don't know.
Who are we looking at, Brad or Chris? Who can answer this question?
The P&Z staff report, the last one goes into pretty good detail on this. We actually, this is really what took us through 2 meetings with Planning and Zoning Commission, was helping the Planning and Zoning Commission understand this exact concept. There's a relatively lengthy memo that's linked in the Planning and Zoning staff report.
It's not in the request right now, Mayor, but it will be in the staff report.
And have we had any community input along this path, or is this just happening without? Go ahead, Esther.
Well, let's get your question answered. What do you mean by community
Well,
input?
I just haven't heard anything about it other than one family that lives near it. So I didn't know if there was any concern.
If anybody spoke at the P&Z meeting or anything.
And I'll watch P&Z if needed. It was just yesterday.
I think, Mayor, if I may chime in, there was actually a few speakers who were supportive. Basically, some other, I think, property owners or property stakeholders within the Biltmore Village neighborhood came to speak in favor of it. I do not recall having any negative speakers about this.
So I have one other question, Chris. So you mentioned a couple of reasons why this project can't use the by right process, which would trigger the community benefits table. One of those is size, which is, I didn't realize this one exceeded the size, but I thought there was something also about the overlay of the historic overlay district that essentially made it impossible to use the by right process. Is there a way for them to use the by right process on this property in this location?
So to use the by right process, yes, you're right. The HRC requirements and historic overlay requirements are part of that also, because they don't necessarily match up with the base zoning that's in place right now. So there are a lot of conflicts.
You're saying a lot of things that I don't quite understand because it's sort of planner lingo. So
Sure.
I get HRC, but I don't understand what you mean by the base. So let me just ask this question. Maybe I need to blow it out. Is it impossible to use the by right process for any construction of, say, a hotel in a historic overlay district because it's incompatible with the by right process?
If those two things are incompatible. So this property is currently zoned, before any changes, Community Business 2. Right. And so Community Business 2 has its own set of standards about how big the building can be, where the setbacks need to be, a little bit about how the building functions and operates. But the historic overlay also has several of those same types of provisions, and they're not the same provisions as the CB2 zoning district. So those conflicts right off mean you can't meet the provisions of the CB2 zoning district and the historic overlay in this project, in the instance of this project. I can't say
to build a hotel on this property in this area, in this overlay, that being the hotel overlay and the historic overlay, they cannot use the by right process.
Right, to meet those, because they have to meet the CB2 district requirements in order to use the by right process, right? That's correct. This project, this hotel can't meet both standards, and that did drive some of the modifications. Now there are some clauses that would allow the HRC or the form kind of code there to take precedent over some of those base zoning district standards. But the code does state that you have to meet those CB2 standards to use the by right process to be that level 2 hotel.
So we've got to, so it sounds like and this probably happens in more than one place, but it sounds like we have created a conflict so that inadvertently, anyway, so that folks cannot use the by right process in some locations.
Just because it's in the hotel overlay map doesn't mean it's eligible for the hotel overlay map. Also, I just wanted to point out, this would have been really helpful information to have on our agenda for today. But if one goes to the planning and zoning page and clicks on February 7 documents, and then goes up to 10 Kitchen Place, and then clicks on, I think it's item G, which is the supplemental information. It's a 17-page document for the supplemental application materials with the list of voluntary community commitments.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kim. And I think historically, we don't usually get this information ahead of the hearing. So I want to point that out, that that's something that's very helpful. You know, sometimes we see like there will be a commitment of sorts, but we don't know what, often like around what they might fund if they choose from the 2 funds. Kim, were you finished before I keep going? Okay. I kind of wanted to push on this a little bit. Like, I know that we're talking about, and I'm doing this ahead of Tuesday, so it's not elaborate on Tuesday, but I know we're talking about not being able to require some language in these conditions, but I would like to understand more about why. And I'm expecting a response that's more like it's best practice, or we can't hold them legally to these things. But what I'm thinking is the fallout, if we do it, is that the developer who agreed to these conditions that we can or can't write into our condition statement is the body that would then sue us if they disagree. So if the developer is the one offering the conditions, why can't we just add them and bet that they won't sue us?
I think that cues my obligation to respond.
It sure does.
Yeah. So let me see if I can do my best at providing you an answer to that question. In this particular circumstance, I think we have laid the groundwork now to say that given the current zoning, given the historic overlay, there's all these requirements and the size of the actual development that essentially has triggered only one option, which is the full conditional rezoning process, a level 3 coming to you. And you will recall, of course, that when we put in place the hotel overlay, it provided in certain circumstances the ability to forego that full council review if you voluntarily provided those community benefits, but only if you provided the community benefits were you able to take advantage of a streamlined review process. But that was an incentive. It was purely voluntary. When we constructed the community benefits table, we essentially tried to marry those items that we thought were actually needed and valued community benefits in and of themselves with things that we could not probably otherwise ask for as part of a conditional zoning or other by right zoning anyway. Examples of those are obviously the donations to various, either the reparations fund or the housing trust fund. Those are things which are probably going to be outside of what we could ever require a developer under North Carolina conditional zoning law to have to do in order to receive a conditional zoning. So that's why we were able to safely, I believe, put them into this voluntary option, which is not a requirement of any developer, but they can do it if they would like to receive something back, which is the streamlined review process. So in this particular case, even though the developer did not have to utilize the community benefits option, they didn't even have that ability for this particular project at this location. They voluntarily agreed to still provide some of the community benefits. So some of those things, we do feel that it doesn't press the legal limit to include them in the conditions because they are being voluntarily offered. Others, however, I do think would essentially weaken the enforceability of the conditional rezoning in and of itself. So our advice from my office has been, if we feel fairly safe adding certain things, if they're voluntarily offered, even though we cannot require them, we'll add those. We'll add every one of those. But those items that draw into question the total legality of the rezoning, we say that we'll allow somebody to agree to those things, but we don't want to include those. And the best examples I can give you are the donations. And to your point, that has been consistent with what we've done now for several years on anybody offering to make donations. So we want to be as consistent as possible, but also not venture into an area we think exposes the city to too much potential liability.
So two questions then, because in previous years and previous staff, we did those types of things. So it would be helpful to understand why we don't do that anymore. And I guess my follow-up question really is, if we do add them, if we're at the dais and we have support to add this language requiring the developer, what is the potential harm that could come? The developer may sue us. The developer may what? Like, what is the fallout? If I'm not, I get that it may be best practice and that we've been doing it this way for several years, but I guess I'm not understanding why we don't just risk it and push it a little bit and make it a requirement.
Well, I'm certainly all for pushing the envelope when we can. I think that we do a fairly good job here in Asheville about pressing those limits to the extent we can. At the end of the day, it will always be council's decision. As city attorney, I'm here to give you advice and to provide you with whatever knowledge I'm able to so that you can make the best decisions for the city. In terms of the change over time, you know, obviously laws are always fluid and we get new cases about these sorts of things from time to time. So our opinions are going to shift, but also from attorney to attorney, you just may have a different level of confidence about a certain item. And we may just be taking a different approach. That's, you know, attorneys are not robots. So we have different opinions on different things as much as we talk like them sometimes.
Great.
My suggestion,
And you do great work.
yeah.
I appreciate and respect your opinions, Brad. I'm trying to figure out how to push this one a little bit and to maybe see if there's an interest from council to try and get some of this language in. Because, like, what is the outcome if we do it?
So, to Councilwoman Turner, I think the shortest answer I can probably give you is this. The items that we can, even though they typically would not be something that would be viable as a standard rezoning condition, but if they've agreed, we're adding those things. A really good example is, although we, as everyone knows, we don't have inclusionary zoning in this state, but if we get voluntary offers of those things, we're including it on the rezoning conditions. We have been and continue to do so. Other items like payments and donations of funds, I think are more problematic. And I say that because we do have very specific laws against what's called contract rezoning. We never want to give the impression, although it's certainly not the case, that we are being paid in exchange for a rezoning. Those situations not only potentially invalidate the rezoning, but they could potentially expose the city to mandatory attorney's fees, which means not only might we be sued to invalidate the zoning, we might be exposing ourselves to financial liability too under some recent laws that have been enacted around rezoning. You've probably heard about the 160D legislation that sort of recodified all land development. One little interesting note in there is it added some mandatory attorney's fees from when we go beyond our own authority. So it's those areas that I always want to try to thread that needle.
But again, it would be if the developer who voluntarily agreed to these things sued us, right? Like, no one else is going to sue us.
That's potentially the most likely. I never want to limit it to that because in any particular case, some other party may have standing, and it's a little hard to forecast that, but the risk is there. And certainly it's going to be lower in some cases than others. So it is always council's final decision, and this is purely legal advice that we're giving you.
Sure.
I would mention that anytime we have these donations of funds, instead of putting in the rezoning, we actually use a separate agreement that's done contemporaneously where it's in writing that they're agreeing to do this. We think that's a very good vehicle for that.
Thanks, Brad.
Okay, great discussion. As Maggie said, we'll have a staff report that comes out later today that'll have a lot of this information. Both Chris and Steph are here today listening, so I think they'll make sure that we're prepared for Tuesday to have some of these discussions and have some of this information built into our slide deck. So again, I want to thank council for the good discussion on that item. And just to kind of keep to not jump back and forth so much, I'm going to go ahead and move from the council agenda review to the council committee reviews. And I'm going to do my two committees first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Deborah to do her committee. So I will start with Planning and Economic Development Committee. We have two items on that agenda for this month. Transportation staff is going to provide an update on the state of transit here in Asheville. That review is going to include an overview of our transit fund, our current fleet information, our facility information, including an update on the Art Place grant, and finally a recommendation to use $300K that's in the $300,000, excuse me, that's in the FY24 budget to support a comprehensive operations and financial assessment for transit. So that'll be an important item for PED to hear. Additionally, on PED, we're going to have planning staff there, and they're going to review and outline a phased approach for implementation of the missing middle study recommendations. I know that's something council's been asking for, and we'll have that ready for the March PED. And of course, that'll be the first of many regular updates to PED on our progress in implementing the missing middle. Councilwoman Roney.
Since PED is going to be hearing about the recommendation for the $300,000 in the budget for transit, just a reminder that we have the Artsy Coalition, including Mountain True, AARP, the Sierra Club, Just Economics, and Better Buses together. There are multiple emails that were sent to council asking for us to do a real-time study, increasing transit service to South Asheville instead of doing another study. I realize that you're going to be hearing a staff recommendation as well. I just wanted to highlight what the community ask is.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roney. We appreciate that feedback in advance.
Hey, Ben, knowing that Sandra will be gone and I'll be temporarily hosting that meeting or chairing it, is there any information you can also round up around the county and why? I mean, the emails I received were that please email the county. I guess something happened at the county level. I don't really understand, but maybe there's some context there that we'll need to know. As well as, I mean, I guess our entire transit plan and funding, it does involve some, right, paratransit and stuff. I don't know where that ended. I'm not on the transit committee, so a lot of this is new to me, but the bigger picture would be helpful.
Good question, and I'll turn it over to Rachel. I think she'll probably address some of that information today. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Biggest thing I wanted to note is while there is the upcoming discussion scheduled for the PED committee, we do plan on having the same presentation delivered to the full city council at a future agenda briefing. We haven't identified the specific date, but it will be either be later in later in March or in early April that we provide that overview. And there are still conversations happening behind the scenes between staff at the city and county level. We hope to work through all of that leading up to a future agenda briefing presentation to full council.
Thank you.
Any other questions on PED? So we did limit that to 2 items this month. We view those as very important discussion topics for council. My next committee is the Boards and Commissions Committee. We actually have a pretty robust agenda for that committee. We have 5 items, none of which include appointments. The first is an amendment to the Civic Center Commission. That commission is working with Chris Corral and his staff to, number one, change the name of that commission to be more reflective of Chris's department and their work, and then also to try to better align the work of that commission with community entertainment facilities work that Chris Corral's department does. So again, that's an ordinance change to better align that advisory body with Chris's department. Rachel covered this in the consent, but we also have an amendment to the River Commission. I won't say anything else on that unless council has a question. The third,
why don't, hello. So this was a request conveyed to me from Brownie Newman, the chair of the county commission, that the county commission asked to eliminate this seat. It is a seat held by a county commission member. So we're honoring their request, and that is the reason you're being asked to vote on that.
A little follow-up to that, and I have just ruled off Riverfront because I've had an ongoing conflict with their schedule, and I hated that. So I sought out someone that could attend. But they just went through this process of updating from the Asheville Area Riverfront Commission to the Asheville Buncombe County Riverfront Commission. Like, why is there not a benefit? I mean, as the commission member, I feel like there was a great benefit to having a county person. Now, they were not often in attendance, but do we have more context for this? Because we just elaborated it to be more inclusive of the county.
I'm glad to forward you the email Brownie sent. It was a very long, detailed email explaining the reasoning for this, and I'm not recalling. It's been a while, so I don't remember it all off the top of my head. But he provided a detailed explanation, and they have apparently had a thorough discussion about this. So
Please do
let me try to find that, and I'll send it to you.
And just to elaborate on that, it's worth noting that while the county commissioner seat would be removed, the county board of commissioners still has 2 appointments to this board. So there are still 2 county appointments that are part of and participate on this commission. And Ms. Campbell.
I just wanted to know if Sarah or Maggie had any of the background information that they could provide as well.
I can tell you that we got direction from the email that the mayor sent us from.
Yeah, I found it. I'll send it to you guys. I just found the email.
All right, thanks.
And I guess I'll reach back out to the Riverfront Commission. I just worry that I know they were getting frustrated with me not being able to attend. And I'm just worried that it's coming from that instead of maybe I'll just send me the email. Maybe I'll reach out to Brownie and Parker. Thank you.
Okay, the third item on the boards and commissions committee agenda is a request to dissolve the Firefighters Disability Review Board. This is a board that hasn't met, and I believe in at least 10 years, if not longer, and it's outdated and no longer has a function. And if you have any questions on that, I'm going to defer to Brad on that. If not, I'm going to keep moving. We're going to have clerk's office is going to do a review of the 2023 annual reports from our advisory boards and commissions. And then finally, clerk's office is going to preview new board management software, which should make our ability to manage and share information to our boards much more efficient and user-friendly. I was encouraged by the clerk's office to encourage the boards and commissions committee members to make sure that you spend some time not only reviewing that memo, but trying to look at the new software and kind of what those agenda packages will look like. We'd like to have a good discussion about that software at your meeting. Any questions on boards and commissions? So I will turn it over to Ms. Campbell to cover her boards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. The Policy, Finance, and Human Resources Committee meet on March the 12th at 10 o'clock a.m. That will be a virtual meeting. There's 2 items on the agenda. The first one is the fiscal year 2024-2025 fees and charges recommendation. This is part of kind of our annual review at looking at our existing fees and charges for various services. We will be asking for a recommendation. And the reason being is that obviously if we're going to adjust these charges and fees, we want to give our customers as much advance warning as possible. However, the charges will not take effect until July 1 of 2024. So we will be recommending adjustments in 4 areas of water, and we've had extensive conversation with the committee as well as with full council with regards to those fees: parking, stormwater, and sanitation. We will come back to full council for final action on March the 26th. The next item for action is the 2024 legislative agenda. And I want to turn it over to our esteemed city attorney, Brad Running, for him to discuss.
All of this esteemed today. I'm getting more credit than I deserve, but I appreciate it, everyone. So
we're sucking up, Brad. Don't worry about it.
This will be somewhat of an annual occurrence. You've seen now legislative agendas in advance of previous legislative sessions of the General Assembly. We are now on the cusp of starting the short session, which occurs in even numbered years. A much shorter, condensed, and generally a smaller subject matter area for considering bills is what the short session usually is. But we've decided that a legislative agenda would be a very good idea. So we've put together, with council input, a proposed draft of a potential legislative agenda. We plan to bring this to the full council at the March 26th meeting. So we're asking the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee, as per usual, to take the initial look at it. We have 10 items on that. I have shared that initial draft with all council members. Happy to answer any questions you've got about it here or off of line, but we'll be providing that to you. It's coming in two parts. It will be those items that are really specific to the format of the short session and the subject matter that they cover, and also our no less important but general and generally long-standing asks are on other legislative matters. Yes, Councilmember Roney.
Yeah, I did circulate a request to add another change to our hotel occupancy tax. I know we may have to have years of repeated asks about this, but either an adjustment to the split and or a cap. So I just wanted to make sure in advance of our meeting, if we do end up having enough council support, we'll need some language around it. So I would love to be prepared for that, hoping we'll have support.
Did we have some language we used previously? We may have something, but.
So Sage, I see your question, but to quickly respond to Councilmember Roney, in anticipation that this might receive council support, I have gone ahead and added that to the legislative agenda. So you will see that on the proposed current version, and it'll be part of my presentation that I'll provide to the group.
Thank you so much.
You're certainly welcome. And Sage.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to echo support, which I know I did through email. Is the same for the short-term rental discussion? Is that also a potential drafted item that I brought up, or is
This
that
was the one about requesting the permit be required to be posted? Yeah,
Correct.
I think we decided to add that too, right, Brad?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I have added that as well, Councilwoman Turner. So that is also included as part of our list. Again, I sent out an email to council members yesterday, I believe, maybe day before yesterday, with the latest version. So I would encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't already seen it. Can't find it, reach out to me. I'll be happy to share another copy of that. But you'll be seeing, I think, 10 total items. Both of those two have now been included in the draft.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mayor.
So just to follow up on that, I just had a meeting with the representatives from the other municipalities in Buncombe County and the county around short-term rentals, because of course, as you know, the county is moving towards some type of short-term rental regulation. And I brought up this issue of the challenge around the permit and that we were going to request it. I think we're going to be hard pressed to get it, but we still should ask for it and lobby for it. And they were really interested in this. So I think, Brad, it would be great if when we're done, you will share our legislative agenda with our municipal counterparts in the county so they can see, and maybe if they're putting together a legislative agenda or have a targeted ask, it would be helpful to have their voices as part of that request. The other thing that I mentioned, I came out of the MPO training since I'm joining the MPO. They managed to get a whole bunch of short-term rental data from the short-term rental something or other. And they said they will share that data with us. And they mentioned that they even get data around, they don't get, of course, they don't get the actual addresses and they had to sign all kinds, they said, privacy, whatever agreements, but they get data around what are whole house rentals and what are partial home rentals. And they said, anyway, they would share that data and we should grab it. They're getting it because there are 10,000 short-term rentals in our region and they need it for traffic count impacts when they do, transportation projects. So I mean, it's a factor. It's a legitimate factor in transportation planning. So I just was interested to know that they got a lot of that information and I'm sure we'd like to see it and they were quite willing to help share that. And
you're saying region like Buncombe County, 10,000?
So when they said 10,000 in the region, I think it's the MPO region,
Okay.
not not
Okay.
just
That sounds
the
more
county
like-
limits. Yeah, that right.
And just a general reminder, we've faced this whole house versus partial home rental issue before because you can simply check the box. It's a misleading data point, unfortunately, but this is why these permit requirements would be so helpful. It would be a huge help to staff. It would be a huge help to any local government that has to administrate and enforce these wild things.
Yes, and I appreciate you, Sage, bringing that up. I think that was an excellent addition to the agenda. I will just note that we would not be alone in this, although we would be fairly novel in North Carolina currently. Other cities have implemented this around the country, Boston, Santa Monica, I think Miami. This has been generally the result of a lawsuit, but these have been either finally agreed upon or even without a lawsuit mutually agreed upon by the platforms. It has been, I think, welcomed. I will just remind council that in the most recent session of the legislature, there were bills filed. Specifically, one bill was filed on this very point, and it was intended to essentially cut this off at the pass. It was Senate Bill 325. It never made it out of the Senate Rules Committee, but something worth looking at. It was intended to prohibit local governments from regulating what it called online marketplaces, which was a fancy way to say the online rental platforms, and prohibit them from sharing information with us. So there's already some legislation around this. So I think at the very least, playing defense around that particular bill, it is worth inclusion on our agenda.
I'm here. I'm glad that we have council support to do this now since we didn't in 2021. But since we now have more council support for this, I wonder if we might reach out to Jackson County and Silva to see what their process is, because I know they've been working towards some process for the past couple of years.
Do you mean a process in terms of trying to get the legislation through?
Or a permitting process or some sort of regulation. So it might help us to build a broader coalition if we understand what cities and counties across Western North Carolina are working on. And I know that's one municipality that was working on regulation.
Well, Brad's teaching the class for the lawyers in North Carolina, so he better know what, what that is. Didn't you just teach for the units or whoever it was?
For the state bar, yes. I actually just taught the class on short-term rental regulation by local governments. I'm actually, for all those really interested, next week I'm teaching it to the North Carolina Paralegals Association. I hear tickets are selling very fast, so try to get on that while you can.
Okay, so that is the last thing on the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee. And again, both of those items, the charges and the legislative agenda, committee members will be asking for action. And now I'll turn it over to Rachel to cover her two items. And just before I do that, the only actual committee that isn't meeting would be Environment and Public Safety, and that committee will be meeting on the 26th of March. Rachel?
Thank you, Deborah. Before I launch into a review of the Equity and Engagement Committee, as well as Housing and Community Development Committee agendas for March, I did want to note that Tuesday the 19th from 11 to noon, the Asheville Downtown Association is hosting the State of Downtown. The reason I bring that up is because of that meeting, we have had to adjust our typical schedule for EEC and HCD. So they are meeting at different times, and one committee is meeting at a different day of the week than is usual. So for the Equity and Engagement Committee, they are meeting on March 19th, which is a Wednesday, starting at 9:30 a.m. We have a couple of really meaty agenda items that we're going to go through. First, Dowa Hitch will be providing our National Community Survey results. Those survey results will also be presented to the full council at a future agenda briefing, most likely on April 18th. Next, you will get a reparations update from Salamanaya Merritt, and she is going to cover 4 different Reparations Commission meeting agendas, as well as provide an update on the Cease the Harm Cease the Harm audit. I did want to note one of those 4 meetings, there will be a special called Virtual Community Reparations Commission meeting this Monday, starting at 6 p.m. And the Reparations Commission requested to have this additional meeting added to their calendar so that they can continue their review of their impact focus area preliminary recommendations. Last on the agenda for the Equity and Engagement Committee meeting is Strategic Partnership Grant Recommendation Review. The committee will be hearing from the Evaluation Committee on their recommendations for funding. 21 applications were received totaling $1.2 million in asks. And just wanted to note that thanks to the recommendation from the Equity and Engagement Committee, we have revised the composition of the Evaluation Committee to include 2 representatives from Asheville City Schools, 2 city staff, 2 students from the CALA program, as well as 1 representative from the university. And for this round, we had a representative from Western Carolina. Moving on to the Housing and Community Development Committee, they will be meeting March 19th at 9 a.m., typically meet at 10 a.m. So just wanted to note that we are meeting 1 hour earlier to accommodate for the State of Downtown luncheon. This agenda will have 2 key items. First will be a preliminary review of the FY 2024 Housing Trust Fund applications. The vote will occur at the April meeting. And then second item on the agenda is CDBG funding recommendations, and that will include a recommendation to full council. So there will be a vote on CDBG funding recommendations. Barring any questions on HCD, I will move down to the review of the 8-week agenda. Just want to note that on March 26th and April 9th, there will be budget work sessions starting at 2:30 p.m. Also want to note that on March 26th, the Carter Development Group will be presenting the Cease the Harm final audit to the City Council. That will come after a presentation to the Community Reparations Commission. April 9th, there are several APD related grant items. And then April 23rd, there will be a State of the Airport presentation. And that is also the date that we are tentatively planning to have UDO amendments for flag lots and cottage standards reviewed by Council. So if there are no questions on the 8-week agenda, I'll turn it over to Ben and the planning team to go through boosting the block.
Thank you, Rachel. And we have Dana Frankel here today, who's been the project manager for the Boosting the Block program and project. And Dana, I also think we have Stephanie Dahl here to support if questions come up, and also Marcus Kirkman and Salah Merritt are here. Equity also played a role in the selection process. And Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you walk through this item. And Council, we're certainly happy to answer any questions as we move through this.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Good almost afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Dana Frankel. I serve as Downtown Projects Manager in the Planning and Urban Design Department. I'm here today to provide information about a grant-funded project called Boosting the Block, and specifically more details about the proposed first major spend, which is a contract with a community facilitator, as well as the process that staff and the community have undertaken to select this proposed vendor. As Ben mentioned, we have several other staff people here today, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have after the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, we are going to cover quite a bit today, so bear with us, but hopefully the information is useful in getting a deeper understanding of this project. So Boosting the Block is one of 3 projects funded by a $3 million grant from the Mellon Foundation. It continues the work of the Pack Square Plaza Vision Plan. The Boosting the Block project builds on and implements recommendations of that plan specific to the block, Eagle and Market Street area of downtown. The project will result in extensive and strategic community engagement, ultimately the construction of a physical gateway and cultural corridor between Pack Square and the block, along with enhanced public spaces and increased community capacity. We'll talk more about that. Community engagement has taken place during the pre-planning stages of the project, which has helped shape the project priorities, deliverables, milestones, and process for hiring. An RFP and extensive evaluation process took place to select a community facilitator who will support all aspects of community organizing, planning, design, and implementation of the project. Local knowledge was included in the criteria in order to support local participation in that process. Community stakeholder participation has been robust throughout the community facilitator selection process. With March 12th City Council authorization of the community facilitator contract, project kickoff would be anticipated for early April with completion in late 2026. And additional resources are available for future purchasing and contracting opportunities throughout this 2.5-year project. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with a presentation outline so you know where we're headed. This presentation will provide a brief overview of the Mellon Foundation projects, more detail on the Boosting the Block project, and information on engagement activities to date. I will go over the scope and role of the community facilitator, the city's contracting policy, and into detail on the selection process that we've gone through. We'll close with some information about project resources and overall next steps. Next slide, please. To begin, I'll highlight council actions that have led us to this point. In the later stages of the Pax Square Plaza visioning process, the Planning and Economic Development Committee of Council and ultimately City Council authorized staff to apply for and accept Mellon Foundation funds to implement forthcoming recommendations of the Pax Square Plaza Vision Plan, including design and construction of a gateway and cultural corridor along South Market Street. In September 2023, City Council adopted the Pax Square Plaza Vision Plan. Last month, staff provided a presentation to Council's Planning and Economic Development Committee, which resulted in a recommendation to move forward to full council for consideration to authorize staff to execute a $180,000 contract with the proposed community facilitator. At last week's meeting, more information was requested about the community facilitator selection process, and that's why we're here today. This item is on the agenda for consideration at next week's meeting. Next slide, please. So the city received a $3 million grant from the Mellon Foundation's Monuments Project Initiative to move elements of the Pax Square Plaza Vision Plan forward. The Mellon Foundation initiative seeks to support public projects that more completely and accurately represent the complexity of American stories and build on efforts to express, elevate, and preserve the stories of those who have been denied historical recognition. So this looks like 3 projects for us. Boosting the Block includes design, engineering, and construction of a placemaking project that better connects the block with Pax Square, along with investments that integrate art, culture, and history into a cohesive and truthful narrative about the neighborhood. We'll talk on the next slide about outcomes. Another project funded through the grant is design and engineering for Pax Square Plaza based on the concept designs that are included in the Pax Square Plaza Vision Plan. And thirdly, the grant will fund a partnership with Buncombe County to expand some of the work that they're doing to support inclusive storytelling in our community. Next slide, please. So for a fuller understanding of what to expect from the Boosting the Block project, anticipated outcomes include a physical gateway and cultural corridor along South Market Street, enhance public spaces and programming that authentically narrates the past, present, and future of the block, consensus and implementation of neighborhood identity and marketing for the block, and increased capacity of neighborhood anchors and stakeholders to shape and influence the future of the block. I'll note, and before we get into those details, that the community facilitator is charged with supporting planning, engagement, and implementation of all of these outcomes. Next slide, please. In terms of public engagement to get us to this point, the Pax Square Plaza visioning process included a year-long planning and engagement effort that included focus groups, geographic focus areas, site tours, and a design charrette. A thread throughout the process was a lack of physical and cultural connectivity between Pax Square Plaza and the block. Staff worked closely with stakeholders on the block a registered neighborhood with the city throughout that process and has continued to work with them on planning for the Mellon Foundation project. The existing neighborhood group, called the Block Collaborative, is open to all property owners and tenants on Eagle and South Market streets. I want to just share a little bit more information here as well. Their mission is to promote a sense of community, cooperation, and the general welfare of property owners, business tenants, and residents within the neighborhood, while also preserving, promoting, and expanding the history, cultural heritage, and legacy of the Black community and Black businesses. We've worked closely with this group on boosting the Block project goals, milestones, and sequencing, as well as a framework for involvement throughout the project. Prioritizing hiring a community facilitator as early as possible in the process, identifying deliverables and qualifications, and participating on the selection committee are examples of this collaboration. Next slide, please. So, community facilitator scope and role. What will they be doing? They will support all aspects of community organizing, planning, design, and implementation for the Boosting the Block project. This work will be supported by a $180,000 budget over a 30-month period, 2.5 years. They will lead engagement activities and serve as the liaison for the city and community on the project. They will foster authentic collaboration, be responsible for facilitating successful outcomes, and ensure appropriate engagement on other Mellon Foundation projects. They will create and manage a work plan in alignment with the city, community, and Mellon Foundation deliverables, and plan and execute various activities in association with the project, including a learning trip, temporary activations, and events. They will create a foundation for strategic planning and investment, expand participation of the community, and explore partnerships in a way that supports the long-term well-being of the district. Next slide, please. So I'm going to shift a little bit to talk about the city's contracting process. The city's policy for a general services contract over $90,000 is fairly simple. It does involve a request for proposals. It requires getting 3 proposals, going through an internal goal setting committee, adhering to Asheville business inclusion policies and procedures. A city council resolution is required for staff to enter into contracts over $90,000. For this process, we undertook a thorough solicitation and evaluation process, which we'll talk more about. And just to distinguish, a general service contract is different from a professional services contract, which is generally architecture, engineering, surveying. That's a request for qualifications process. And a building or construction process, it requires bidding. That process looks different as well. Next slide, please. So onto the details of the selection process we went through. We established a selection committee, which included community representatives, YMI Cultural Center, a board member representative, also a representative from the YMI Cultural Center and Noir Collective, Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church. Eagle Market Street Development Corporation had 2 participating representatives submitting 1 score sheet. Buncombe County Community Engagement staff has been highly engaged on this process. We had 2 staff participating, submitting 1 score sheet, and we had 3 City of Asheville staff participating on this committee, including Marcus Kirkman from the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Between the 3 of us, we submitted 2 score sheets. And so that looked like 5 community members, 5 city and county staff members participating in terms of scoring, 4 community members, and 3 city county staff. Next slide, please. Evaluation criteria, which was included in the RFP, included qualifications. I'll highlight that we, it includes a lot more than what's listed here, but we did call out, in addition to relevant experience, specifically an understanding of the community and the history and cultural heritage of the block. Project understanding and approach. We asked for a personal statement to demonstrate competency and commitment to the cultural heritage of the block, along with understanding of scope and approach to the project overall. And these were some ways that we tried to encourage and to some extent, weigh local folks that are familiar with this area and with the community. Relevant projects and references, as well as cost proposal, were all considered. Next slide, please. So we released the RFP on November 17th. We worked really hard to try to get as much as we could done before the holidays, posted to the official North Carolina Purchasing System website. We held a pre-proposal meeting. We had a lot of Q&A, and we posted all of that in our addendum along with a recording of the pre-agenda meeting. We shared contact lists of all the attendees and let folks know they're welcome to contact each other and work on collaborative teams. Proposals were due December 11th, and we received 11 proposals. And I have listed the firms and teams that we received proposals from here. Next slide, please. So we went through 3 rounds of review. First, the selection committee reviewed all proposals and selected the top 4 based on the RFP evaluation criteria. And I've listed those 4 candidates or teams here. The selection committee then held virtual interviews for these 4 teams. Yes, Councilwoman Turner.
And I apologize for interrupting, but of these reduced candidates as they move forward, is there any indication of whether or not some of these folks are local anywhere? I haven't seen it yet.
So we did not ask. I might want to look to Brad on this, because some teams, while staff might know that they're local, or they might write about where they're coming from and why that shapes their approach and perspective, it's not specifically required as part of the process. I'm not sure if it's allowed as part of the process, but in some cases with folks working remotely, it's not always clear exactly where they are located. Does anyone do any other?
And my little follow-up to that, just to phrase it better, is that I wonder if we're struggling so much to award contracts locally, should there be additional points when you are a resident of the area? And I'm not involved in this, and I feel like it's a little beyond our, we're supposed to be policy, and this is way down in your staff process, but I have concerns about this because we're not meeting our goals. And I know that there are some locals that are on this list, and I just kind of want to raise that concern a little bit.
Can I invite any other staff people to speak to that?
I also have heard and share similar concerns if the RFP process is preventing us from contracting and getting resources into the local community. But I know Antoinette has her hand up as well.
Yeah, and then I'll hand it off to Brad for this. So first of all, I'll just go ahead and throw it out there that I was a little disappointed that given that we have applicants from the area, literally business owners who got places on the block, that we landed where we apparently, potentially, until we vote on it, have landed. I'm wondering what the 2 disparity studies we've completed would allow us to do, and if it's possible to send this back for further consideration, because just something in me, it doesn't feel good knowing that this is an opportunity to increase economic development within our own community.
Same.
So perhaps this is a good time for me to chime in, if I may, Dana. All good questions, and staff understands the concern there, and obviously the greater policy initiative behind it. I want to try to answer all of those questions, but let me lay the foundation by saying this. Anytime that a city is trying to implement let's just call it a locals only or a locals preference, that is something that requires us to jump through a few additional legal hoops before we can do. And the classic example is something that Councilmember Mosley just brought up, which is the disparity study that we recently completed in order to give us the legal justification to do race and gender conscious contracting. Now, a locals only contracting policy or a preference for locals does not quite rise to that same level. However, there are still constitutional concerns about that. In fact, without going into too much detail, the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution places some very specific limits on limiting what would essentially be interstate commerce. And I know that, we're talking about Asheville versus maybe Charlotte or Raleigh or some places, but the same rules are going to apply. I'm not here to say that we could not do that, but we would have to jump through some preliminary steps to establish what the law calls a legitimate local public interest. And that would be on a contract by contract basis to show that we have the legal right to be able to do that while also not overly burdening interstate commerce. Now that's, again, we don't have to get into too much detail about that, but that is currently not in the city's contracting policy, which council has approved, and staff has followed that particular policy. You will note that although we haven't said that we're simply going to fully favor a local firm, we did include a preference for local awareness and knowledge. So the staff has done, I think, a pretty admirable job of trying to include that aspect to the degree that they could without crossing over into needing additional legal justification. I don't know who was first here. I think Councilperson Roney.
No, it was Antoinette.
My apologies. Councilwoman Mosley.
Well, I pulled back my hand. I need to think a little bit more before I ask what I was going to ask.
Okay, so I see here that we had multiple rounds of interviews, but I understood that there was another one. Were local, like it said 3, but I see 2. So was there a local firm that did make it through the final round of interviews?
The final round, yeah, I have the next slide is the final round, folks, which I could move on to. The first round was just reviewing the proposals. The second, thank you.
Okay.
Second round was virtual interviews. The third round was in-person interviews, which were 3 different teams and candidates. 2 of those are based locally.
Yeah, thank you, Dana, for this presentation and for digging in more with us. That's what I had hoped we would see. It's just an incredible amount of work already, and I'm just curious about how we're gonna grow our local capacity if we're not able to find a way to weave in our goals into our contracting outcomes. I defer to my colleague.
I'm ready to ask the question. Sorry, Kim. How heavily was the local knowledge weighted amongst all of the considerations?
I can't break that down into numbers, and each participating member on the selection committee might have, used the criteria to consider their scores and how they scored, but I wouldn't be able to break that down for you. So it was in 2 of the different, so if we go back to slide.
That's what I was going to ask you to do,
Yeah.
Dan. If you could go back to that slide. It's
Yeah.
about 60.
Yeah, I guess that's the big question is like, what's our rubric?
Keep going back, please.
So
There you
slide
go.
11. So we had specific requests or consideration for these areas that, what's the word? That, elevate the local knowledge under qualifications as well as project understanding and approach, which was a majority of the scoring in terms of weight.
And I want to emphasize also that the majority, well, I would say, if you go back to the voting, that the local people had, the community members had the majority of the votes. Go back 1 slide, please.
Which is, thank you for highlighting that. It was we had really intentional conversations and
Back further, please.
coordination to ensure that that representation on that evaluation committee felt appropriate to the community.
So did I understand that correctly, that all those folks listed, the local community members that voted, that was just one portion of the overall scoring?
So these community members participated in each round, all steps of the process. All of us were at the table together at the very end in making this final determination.
Well, and I'll just share my concern a little more directly. We have an applicant that is literally in the block, that is a longtime resident, that was not awarded this. And it almost sounds inappropriate is the word that keeps coming to mind, because we have leadership. And I know that we're in this complicated world of scoring rubrics and applications and RFPs from all over, but like, is there not something that we could do to, I mean, it sounds like the policy needs to be redrafted or worked on or something, but I'm personally disappointed that we have an applicant that scored really high in the block area that isn't moving forward. And if I understand correctly, the group that is being supported by staff is actually from out of town. So I just want to be just blunt. I don't like that. It doesn't feel right to me.
And quite frankly, you run the risk because we're in such a small community. You know, we often think of conflicts. I'm looking at some of these folks. You know what? I'm going to pull back that comment too.
So I have a question about process, and Brad, maybe you can help us here. We have the disparity study. A few meetings ago, there was a contract in question about transportation, providing transportation to kids who don't otherwise have transportation to Parks and Recs programming. And I did ask a question then, and it's one of the biggest, like smallest but mighty regrets that I have, that I didn't just make a motion to go with the MWBE firm. Like I know what the economic impact is. I felt the accountability afterwards. I was reached out afterwards. Like, could we just make a motion to override the recommendation and go with a local firm? Does council have the ability to do that in this situation?
So excellent question. I'm glad you brought it up. So what you see here is the result of a process which was undertaken by utilizing the policy that council has approved for us to do procurements based upon any kind of contracts. This, as Dane has mentioned, this particular contract is a general service. We are required under the policy, not exactly state law, but to follow this RFP process. And we've done that. If council decided to move in a different direction from what resulted as the recommended firm here, I believe that we would probably need to have a conversation about what legal liability that might expose us to from the individuals or entities that scored higher on this. It is a similar situation to the disparity study that has given us the right to do more than we could have done otherwise. But not in every case are we getting the kind of representation from the otherwise disadvantaged classes of bidders that we would like. However, you are still confined to a degree by not just the bidders who actually bid, the capabilities that they bring, and the legal limitations that we have under that policy. It's a very sort of narrow needle that we try to thread. I would say in this particular case, we've established a rationale for city staff's recommendation. Council is not at all obligated to approve this, but I would suggest that a better path for council would not be to take a lower scoring firm, because I do think that might create some questions about the legitimacy of the RFP process. If council wished, there are other alternatives that we could discuss, but those would require us to essentially start from scratch and redo the process.
For myself, I had a question about, like, once again, is our RFP process actually getting in the way of meeting our goals? When I look at the goals of the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, and it talks about the livable built environment and a resilient economy and a healthy community and interwoven equity, and I'm like, is this RFP helping us get there? I would be inclined to decline this recommendation altogether if I knew there was a path forward to us to say, we want to project manage this firm with these outcomes and choose a project manager. What are our options outside of the RFP process?
But can I, Brad, so I appreciate your frustration with this, Kim, and I see the problem. I will say this is such a tricky area, because when the county ran into criminal problems with awarding of contracts. One of the things that was highlighted at that time, obviously we got a lot of questions about, well, what was our process for awarding contracts and how did it differ from what the county was doing, which was later determined to be illegal. And we were able to say that we use this RFP process that involves a panel that uses criteria and scores the applicants and, tries to make it as much as possible an objective process that is outside the purview of elected officials and outside the purview of any one staff member who might be making inappropriate decisions about awarding contracts. So I'm not saying there's a one way to do this. I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. So while I am totally sensitive to the issues going on here and the desire to try to make this process get to outcomes that make more sense for what we're trying to achieve, I worry a little bit about what council's limitations are in influencing this process. But I'm not saying we can or can't. I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade, and I'm glad to figure out some other way to do this.
And thank you for highlighting some of that why. It's the same kind of why I ask every time I see Dunkin' Donuts at a city event instead of one of our local coffee shops. Is like, we say we want a resilient economy, we got to do different action.
Agreed. So it sounds like here we are. I know we can't, just like when we put out an RFP for development or something, we can't just pick and choose. Plainly, we just can't. So I guess the question then is, if we were to not support this on Tuesday, can someone between now and Tuesday get us some kind of idea of the impacts to the timeline around the Mellon grant and the overall process? Because it sounds like we would have to essentially do another RFP process. I don't know that we have a workaround that would remain us being legal in our decisions,
Sage, I know Dana has raised her hand, but if I can just quickly answer that. My suggestion to you was, if council decided that they were not satisfied with the results of this and you did not want to move forward with approving this particular contract, our current policy would require staff to issue a brand new RFP and start from scratch. And we could certainly look at what council's policies and inclinations are and try to design a process in line with that, and also congruent with our legal limitations, but we would be starting from scratch, I think.
And I guess that's what I'm requesting, if possible. And I know everybody has so much to do between now and Tuesday, but if it's possible to get some kind of synopsis of what that looks like. Is it 6 months? Can it be done in 2 months? What does it impact everything detrimentally? That would help inform my decision, because I just have lingering concerns. And did I hear correctly that the chosen applicant is not even a minority or women-owned business? They're not, or they are?
Black woman-owned firms.
Okay.
They
All right,
are
I misunderstood.
out of Durham.
Yes, we can definitely get you all information about impacts in terms of the timeline. But what concerns me most, Brad, is in terms of redoing the process, somehow if our ultimate goal is to try to get someone who is local, we need to adjust, have something that says that that there's a preference. And I don't mean to use that word in a legally challenging way.
I wouldn't say preference. What I would say is perhaps increasing that first rubric from 30 to a different number and decreasing other rubrics. You see what I'm saying? To not have it be the sole qualifier, but you
absolutely
increase the percentages of each.
Okay, so you just want us to score a little higher if they're a local bidder. And Brad, you would, like, I shouldn't say bidder, but if they are responsive to the RFP.
So do we ever have discussions about Section 3? This is just coming off the top of my head, so I don't remember the code, but it's some type of adjustment that's given a lower income, or do you know section 3 what I'm talking about, Brad?
Are you talking about our code, Antoinette, our city code?
Mm-hmm. No, not section 3 of ours, but it's like
It's a contracting issue. There's been violations for in the past on a local level. I thought it's either 3 or 7, but I remember there's been issues with contracting and who's most impacted. I would have to look it up too. I would usually defer to
federal
Brad.
consideration. It's a federal consideration.
Yeah, I probably have to look into that a little more before responding here. You know, I think that there are ways that we can adjust process, adjust policy around these things. I do think that the best path forward is if council decided it did not want to move forward with the current recommendation, again, probably starting from scratch, and that may involve multiple issues with adjusting policy around this. Again, you saw what it looked like when we adjusted our contracting policy. I'm not suggesting this would require a disparity study, but we would have to begin laying out foundational rules for what kinds of contracts we would apply these preferences. And I would caution council in making the suggestion that we would overly weight any particular category as a means of directing any contract unfairly to a particular person or firm. In other words, I want to be cautious that the perception is not out there that we are reverse engineering the competitive bidding process to not being a fair one.
And Dana, you can respond to the time frame, right? And
I can try.
okay.
I will just add that with this item at the next council meeting, there's, with an opportunity for public comment, I would invite and encourage council to, if we can get any representatives from the selection committee to speak, that might be helpful to understand the process. We had all of these conversations at the table together and went through a really thorough, worked together really closely on the evaluation criteria and all of that. So we'll have an opportunity to learn more.
Well, let me ask you this, council. And I'm trying to balance, I'm just trying to think about the folks that worked on the selection committee and all the work they put into this. And I understandably, I think they will be disappointed if we're sort of scrapping all that work. And so should we ask that this not be heard by council and go back to the drawing board with a do-over? Or do we want to go through the exercise of hearing from the selection committee, and then making a determination of whether or not we want to act on it at that time? But what do you all think?
My concern, why I asked, I'm sorry, Kim, go ahead.
I have a little bit of a concern that it's only 4 council members here today. I'd kind of
I know, we have that problem too.
To circle around and see where everybody is at. It would feel a little weird if it's just the 4 of us making that decision right now.
Well, I mean, it's right now it's on our agenda for Tuesday, so we don't have a choice but to try to sort of figure that out. I can try to touch base with other folks and then circle back with the manager before Tuesday and make a final decision. I'm glad to do that.
Or could we reach out to the other 3 council members before the agenda goes live tomorrow?
Maybe. Sandra said she's traveling. We can try. And then I know Maggie's traveling with her daughter's student group. So maybe.
This is why I asked about timeline. Like, how upsetting to the timeline is it if we delay this?
I spoke with 3 of the selection committee members, was it yesterday or the day before? I heard from them pretty clearly that their biggest concern at this moment was about timeline and wanting to get started immediately. So I know that much. I can't say, I would need some time to lay out a new process and see what that timeline looked like if that's what we're doing. So there would be impacts to the timeline. And that is an issue worth considering, particularly because we've tried really hard, getting this through before the holidays. Getting a community facilitator on board is really what kind of gets the rest of the components of the project in motion. So it is, that's just some of the factors that we have at play.
And if I can add, I don't think we're in a position to articulate the timeline in this meeting, but we do have a follow-up document that we'll prepare after this meeting. So I think if we had some time to add that information to the follow-up document, we can provide that to full council so you can fully understand the impact of a delay and what that means. So I think with a little bit of time, we can put that together and have a better response.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also something to be said for rushing with the timeline now and getting different outcomes that we want is it would be better for us to go ahead and let staff know that if we're going to move forward quickly, we should move forward quickly with a new process because we're just getting further behind on doing that. For example, I think about the 319 Biltmore project too, is like we could speak up sooner. And I think today is a great day to say, hey, we do need to go back to the drawing board. So I think if I was one of the council members who couldn't be at this table right now, I would appreciate an opportunity to weigh in on whether or not it's on the agenda on Friday.
Stephanie, did you want to?
I think Marcus.
And then Marcus.
I had actually put my hand down. I was going to address the timeline, and I can do that in the follow-up document. Thank you.
Marcus.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Just wanted to share that in this process, a huge component of this entire process was the very intentional, inclusive community engagement piece with the community and ensuring that their voices were absolutely heard in this process. And throughout the voting process, from the community members, it was consistently in alignment with the outcome with regards to the presentations that they heard, taking into account all of the local knowledge that everybody was well aware of, and really desired the local presence, taking all of that in consideration and looking at all the presentations. The voting still fell in alignment with the outcome. And I just wanted to share that piece.
Thank you, Marcus. I'll take this moment to share one representative on the committee who's involved with a lot shared at the end that he felt like it was the best process he had ever been part of with the city. Again, just trying to help with information sharing here and painting a full picture of what that felt like at the table.
Is there any way to hear from that group? Do they have any narrative or anything, or could they? I mean, because I want to honor and respect that. I mean, it was a thorough process. You did have lots of locals at the table, and maybe I just need to reach out to them directly. But like how, I'm just confused about how it got to this, but maybe we could hear from them directly about if there was consensus that this is the best path forward, or, is that an option?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question. Sage,
Well, we have all these.
just a little bit. You want the community members?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious. I mean, if they felt pretty strongly and they had consensus on this, then, I mean, I know it's a rubric, but there was discussion as well, right? In that final group. So maybe I'll just reach out to them directly.
Yeah, I think Dana's response was public comment, but I feel a little bit I'm torn between whether maybe this should go on the council agenda for Tuesday, or as you said, in terms of the timeliness, if we are hearing essentially that you are leaning towards an entire process, quite frankly, every day matters. So I'm a little conflicted here on the next steps. Plus, I'm also conflicted in terms of having the rationale for not receiving the recommendation from a committee made up of committee members and the preference for some type of local vendor and how we incorporate that into future processes, or is it just this process? So are we talking about a broader change in our policy and goals, or are we just talking about this particular RFP
I
process?
wish we were talking about supporting local economy as part of our comprehensive plan on a general, because I think that it would, I see really great outcomes sometimes in our purchasing. And then sometimes I see it just slipping on some of the small stuff. But for me, this project specifically is like so woven into conversations about our local history and our relationships. And it does feel to me like a sticking point that it would be one thing if we didn't have a local firm, but we had multiple. And so one of the things I heard was, well, it's okay if the local firms don't get it because they'll still participate. And that sounds like free work. And that doesn't seem right to me on this project.
Well, I don't know if we have expressed that. Hopefully you didn't hear that from staff.
I think that it's a general, I can say what I've heard, but it's in general. And so when you asked, is it our policy and process as a whole or this project? And so I was trying to let you know from my perspective, it's especially heavy for this project.
Deborah, I would say that I don't think we're going to have time to rehash the whole policy and do it properly in time for this to work, but I would like to see that in the future. It does sound like if we're not attaining the outcomes from our RFP process, then perhaps we need to be reviewing the policies.
Thank you. And I think in terms of the next steps, Mayor, you will be reaching out to the other council members, and then you'll get back with me and I'll get back with staff as to whether this will be on the agenda for Tuesday. I think that's next steps. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Dana, can you send me the presentation you just made? So I've got it just in case there's like any questions.
Absolutely, we will. Maggie, we can't answer you. I know what you're going to ask, and the answer is not yet.
No, I know that, but in terms of getting everything else out to council today, I will send everything to council that includes this under new business, and then I will wait tomorrow for direction on what gets posted online. Is that okay with everybody?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, unless there's further discussion, I think this concludes the agenda. Unless Mayor, if there's anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, all good.
All righty, thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend. Bye.